This is the Tom Anderson Show, broadcasting live from the KVNT studios, 7 to 9 a.m., Monday through Friday.
Joining us now is Steve Mosher, and China has been a topic of this program for many years, and particularly since we're a regional radio show and in the Pacific Northwest and in Alaska, there are inextricably linked resource development issues and Arctic infrastructure issues. We look at China in many respects as a threat, and Steven Mosher has written about China, and he has a book that he's going to talk about, The Bully of Asia, why China's dream is the new threat to the world order, and he'll tell us about that book. He'll also discuss his background. He's an expert on China. He's lived there. Steve, welcome to the program, and tell me what your inspiration was, the big million-dollar question, to write this book.
Well, I saw China on the march all around the globe, of course. When we talk about China, we're talking about the Chinese Communist Party. And we always have to bear in mind that the first and foremost victims of the Chinese Communist Party are the Chinese people themselves, because the Chinese Communist Party over the past 70 years has probably killed 100 million Chinese, tortured, starved, executed to death over the past few decades. So, among other things, the party itself is the biggest killing machine in human history, and its biggest victims have been the Chinese people. And of course, you look around China's neighbors. China makes territorial claims towards Japan. It makes threats towards Taiwan. It claims the entire South China Sea. It has now been threatening Australia, India. Name a country that has borders with China, and you will see a country that is being bullied by China. So it is literally the bully of Asia. And we hope that one day the Chinese people have a better life, a more free life, a life that in which human rights is respected. But they do not have that today under the misrule of the party.
I look at Tibet. I look at Hong Kong. I look at the Uyghurs. I look at Taipei, where I've been when I was a state lawmaker and met with their leadership. I look at where my wife is from, the Philippines. And if I were to either publicly or privately talk to government leadership, advocacies, faith-based groups of any of those places, they would not be favorable towards China. I'm sure Japan's not a fan. I'm sure South Korea's not a fan. I'm sure Southeast Asia's not a fan. And yet, particularly like with the Philippines in past leadership cycles, they have connected with China and they have done business with China. Is that purely because they needed the money?
Well, there are lots of reasons, but the Chinese Communist Party advances itself by using three different methods. It uses bribes, it corrupts everything it touches, and it uses sex and drugs to win power and influence among politicians overseas. The Chinese communists have no respect, of course, for democracy or human rights. They call democracy moneybags democracy, and they believe that they can buy off any politician, whether it be in the United States, Canada, the Philippines, any country, simply by offering them enough money. One senior Chinese leader said not long ago that if you offer one bag of money and it's not enough, you come back and offer two. So that's the way they've been playing the game in the world, and that's why I say that they are not willing to be responsible members of the current world order. They want to fundamentally change the world, and it will be, if they succeed, a much darker place for people in the Philippines, South Korea, and all of the countries that border China. China's been basically in a non-kinetic war with Australia for most of the last 2 years because the Australian leader, Scott Morrison, said, we need to investigate the origin of the pandemic. Did the COVID-19 virus come from China? Was it developed in a lab there? And because of that, China has been engaged in economic warfare against Australia, banning up to 16 different Australian products for the last year and a half, hoping to bring Australia to its knees by using economic warfare. That's the kind of thing the bully of Asia engages in literally on a daily basis.
Steve Mosher is his name, Bully of Asia, Why China's Dream is the New Threat to the World Order. Now, 2017, this could be purchased hardcover. We fast forward 4.5 years later. You're re-releasing it? Is that how you would describe it? Does that mean it's been updated? And when can someone purchase this?
Yeah, it's been updated. There's been a lot that's happened over the last few years. We went through a period from 2016 to 2020 where China was set back on its heels by the tough-minded policies of the previous president. And now, of course, China's moving aggressively forward in Central Asia and really all around the globe. So I've written new material for the book, a new introduction, and this is an issue that's not going away. You know, I like to say that Russia, people spend a lot of time on Russia, but Russia is essentially the threat of the past. China is the threat of the future as long as it's under the control of the Chinese Communist Party. And it's something we have to, we're thinking about every day now. I mean, Americans who are dealing with the pandemic, for example, realize that the virus came from China. And public sentiment, not just in the U.S., but around the globe in country after country, has turned dramatically against Beijing because of its release of this illness on the world.
Stealth War is a book that I read a while back, and I interviewed former General Robert Spaulding. Stealth War, How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept. He got into the infrastructure and the technology and the fact that there is this really long planned effort by the Chinese government and leaders that are now deceased. And I asked him, I said, General, have you been threatened? Have you been monitored? And he said, absolutely, because of my book, especially because I was high profile in the military. And then when I was out, I wrote this information about China. Have you had the same? I mean, your book has been out since 2017. You're updating it. Have you been threatened, monitored, censured by China?
Absolutely. By the way, General Spaulding is a friend of mine. He's a very good guy, and he's one of the few out there who is speaking openly and directly about the threat that China poses. My history with China goes back to 1979. I was teaching at the University of California at Berkeley. I was completing a PhD at Stanford when I was selected to be the first American social scientist on the ground in China. I lived in China for a year, lived in Asia for 10 years. I read, write, and speak Chinese. And I found myself in the midst of a people who recounted to me horrific human rights abuses. They told me about the mass killings when the communists came. They told me about the mass starvation after the Great Leap Forward. And of course, I was there when the one-child policy began with its forced abortions and forced sterilizations. That was a gripping experience for me, and of course, to see what the women, the families, the children were being put through. So I was declared by the Chinese Communist Party to be an international spy. And I was put on the blacklist back in 1980 as an international spy. So you ask if I've been threatened? Yes, absolutely. I've been on the blacklist of the party for the last 41 years. I think I hold the record in that regard. I have been able to get back into China until the last few years by going across a border station in the middle of the night when the computers were down. That is no longer possible because of the high-tech advances that China's made that General Spaulding has written about. They are not very good at innovating because of the culture of corruption in China where people are on the take. But they are very good at espionage, very good at stealing the latest and greatest in American technology and then manufacturing it on the cheap. And that's the world that we're now living in.
Well, I reported several weeks ago here on the Tom Anderson Show a national story talking about, from a Chinese expert who lived in China and worked in the government, about the fact that, as you described, the military officers and leadership and headquarters are nearly all based on bribes. And from what I read, and you would know more about this than I, and General Spaulding talked about it as well in the interview, they purchase their positions, and they have very little experience in warfare. So they may have a lot of men in their military, and they may have some pomp and circumstance, but it's unearned and with lack of expertise. Speaking of expertise, someone who is an expert is Steve Mosher, and he's the author of Bully of Asia, Why China's Dream is the New Threat to World Order, and he's updated it since 2017. I'm going to purchase it, absolutely. We're going to come right back with him to learn more about the Chinese threat right here on the Tom Anderson Show.
This is the Tom Anderson Show, broadcasting live from the KVNT studios, 7 to 9 a.m., Monday through Friday.
We continue with Steve Mosher, author of Bully of Asia, Why China's Dream is the New Threat to World Order. Steve, when I think about agriculture, I think about the fields of wheat in Canada and corn and wheat and others in America, and even Russia's growing in certain parts of that region, and Europe and across the world. In South America as well. China, I don't think of as an agriculture metropolis, but I know that they're gravely dependent on it. You talked about the fact they have a rapidly growing economy, huge population. Let's talk about agriculture. Then before we wrap up, I want to talk about genocide and the religious persecution. People hear about it, but they may not know the depth of it. So in agriculture, are they hurting or are they thriving?
Oh, they're absolutely hurting. I mean, this is a country that only has about 9% of its land is arable land that they grow crops on, and they've been polluting that with great rapidity because of the rapid industrialization, polluting groundwater and tainting the soil so that a lot of that land is no longer arable. They're building buildings on much of it as well. So they need food desperately from overseas. So they buy huge shipments of grain from Canada, the United States, and Australia. But they're also doing this. They're also buying up farmland in Canada, the United States, and Australia. And I think that there have to be limits placed on that because obviously we don't want to leave our own people resource short. We don't want to leave them hungry if food is shipped disproportionately to China because they own the land, they own the factories. The other thing that's going on here, though, is that industrial production is being centered in China. And the rest of the world, in the view of the Chinese Communist Party, has one function, and that function is to provide raw materials for China's factories and food for China's workers, and then to serve as consumers of the products that result from China's industrial machine. So basically, the Communist Party would like to industrialize China and deindustrialize the rest of the world, use us as a source of food and raw materials. Again, that's not a world that we want to live in. We need factories here. We need good, high-paying factory jobs in this country to sustain the middle class.
Absolutely, we do. Before we get to genocide and religious persecution, I have a friend in the South who's former law enforcement officer who is now in remodeling and turning homes and has done so with great success in Georgia, in North Carolina, and places along the South communities. And he says, and he does it sparingly, if at all, but he says that sales to Chinese companies or companies that have a Chinese interest are building, and they're sniffing around across the South to buy up land as much as possible. That is a threat, in my opinion, and I implored him not to sell, and he understood and agrees. Are we finding that the scent of money is an inducement to sell property to Chinese, even if someone listens to you in great horror at the atrocities of China? Is that something we have to battle, that people say, heck, I'll sell just for the cash, even though it's the Chinese?
Well, yeah, and what people have to bear in mind, there are a couple of states that ban the sale of agricultural land to non-American citizens. And I think that probably should be a national policy here just to sustain our agricultural base in this country, which is an important part of the economy. The other thing is, though, because of the culture of corruption in China and because of the ongoing purge carried out by the new Red Emperor Xi Jinping against his political enemies. Hundreds of thousands of Communist Party officials have literally been arrested and charged with crimes of corruption. And so there is a desperate pool of money in China, desperate to leave China and be invested in places like Canada, the U.S., and Australia, where it is safe from government expropriation. That's why this flood of money comes in to the United States, much of it in cash. You have cases where a student from China with no visible source of income will go and buy $1 million house. Where did the money come from? Well, probably from his parents, who are officials and who are on the take in one way or another in China, ripping off ordinary people. So that happens a lot. These kinds of sales ought to all be questioned.
All be questioned and banned, preferably. Steve Mosher is his name, Bully of Asia, Why China's Dream is the New Threat to World Order, and he's updated it since 2017, so that's a delight to me, who reads the books from Chang and Spalding and others to this end. So let's talk in wrap-up, and we'll get you back in the future. I'd like to talk about this after the book is released again. Genocide, religious persecution. If someone said, you know what, God bless Steve Mosher, God bless this advocacy, honey, let's pack up the kids. We're gonna go to China. We're gonna bring our Bibles. We're gonna try to convert some folks and help them out. You can't do that, can you? They are anti-religion. I recall.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I myself, through the Population Research Institute in years past, have helped to build churches in China and have started orphanages in China. That is no longer possible because of the controls that have been imposed by the government on all religious activity. Everything is under the control of the Chinese Communist Party's United Front Department, and they control. They require that all staff who work for churches be trained in communist theory. They require that all collections be reported to the government in the exact amount of money collected. They require that no religious activity take place outside the walls of a building, so that a pastor can't go to someone's home and pray over someone who's sick, because that would be a violation of the new religious strictures. Basically, the bottom line is the Chinese Communist Party believes there is only one church in China, and that is the church that it runs. And the acolytes in the church are party members, and the head of that church, the leader of that church, is Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party. The communism is a secular religion that seeks to replace, you know, the religion as understood as the search for God and for meaning in life. It seeks to be all things to all people. That's why the churches that we built have now been, in some cases, torn down. The orphanage that we started has been taken over by the government, because you can't allow Christians to do any good, because it makes the Communist Party look bad. The party has to be the be-all and end-all of life in China, and you cannot carry out acts of charity without making the party look like it's failing in some of its duties.
And under that, Stephen, under that is the genocide. And you talked off air with me about the fact that the Uyghurs seem to have the headline of late, but Tibet's right behind them with this genocide. And is that truly a concerted effort to get rid of them? Is it harvesting of organs? Is it control? Or is it just the whole swath of that because of Communist China's mentality?
Well, here's what's being done to the Uyghurs. You've got 12 million Turkish-speaking people in western China. They've lived there for thousands of years. The men are being arrested and put in concentration camps where they labor 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, producing goods often for export to the United States. The women and small children are left at home, but they're not alone because policemen are stationed with them. They are billeted in the same homes. The Communist Party says, don't worry. They may sleep in the same bed, but they stay at least 3 feet apart at night. I don't find that very reassuring. The young people are sold, literally sold in batches of 100 to factories along the Chinese coast, where they're kept in factory compounds and forced to work 6.5 days a week, only allowed out on Sunday afternoon for a couple of hours. Of course, a lot of the younger kids, the Uyghur kids, in elementary school and junior high school are being put in orphanages, are being put in boarding schools where they are taught to read and write in Chinese and not taught in their native language. It is genocide in real time, a kind of slow-rolling genocide with the goal of eliminating this people from the face of the earth. And the same thing is happening in Tibet. The Tibetan language is being forbidden now in the schools, even the elementary schools. In the Mongol-speaking areas, the same thing is happening. These cultures, these ancient cultures, are being wiped out.
Boy, I tell you, we will get him back after the book is released. When is the book released? Is it on the 25th of this month?
It is, yes, coming out soon.
Okay, and we will purchase it, and folks will bring Steven Mosher back. It has been an honor. Bully of Asia, Why China's Dream is the New Threat to World Order, and you're definitely well-spoken and knowledgeable, and we look forward to having you back again. Steve, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Great show.
Absolutely. And we will make a YouTube video of this, so make sure you check that out at Tom Anderson Show. Bully of Asia. It's worth buying and it's worth considering. We have to keep them in check without question. Stay with us.